Good morning, or good day. Sorry, I never say good morning.
It works.
It is good morning here, but I know you can listen to this podcast anytime, anywhere. So good day, everyone. Welcome to the Inverted Orthodoxy podcast. I am Blake, and I am here with Kyle.
Awesome to be
no
here.
Doug today.
No.
But we are ready to answer your questions, tackle them, take you on an adventure, as I've been saying lately.
Love it.
Trying to lead you through the theology and just all the great things of Christianity through all the ages
Yep.
to come to answer your questions.
Perfect.
That is what we're trying to do. And I will try and speak more clearly. So
You did a great job. It's just an adventure to get through.
it is an adventure to get through the intro to our podcast. I am excited this morning. Nothing to do with the podcast other than I have a different brand of coffee that I'm very excited about on
Praise
the podcast.
the Lord. You're not going to get any objection from me.
So I am excited.
I'm behind you in coffee.
You may hear slurping on the podcast. Sorry, Keelan. But I'm just excited about coffee time this morning. So
It does smell really good.
it's much better than the coffee I've endured probably for about the last year on the podcast. I drink coffee because it's freezing in this room and it keeps me warm. But yes, this morning I will enjoy my coffee.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. No problem for me.
Now that you know that, we're going to jump in. We got some AER, so let's see that.
Time for accusations, explanations, and recantations.
So, listening to your AER from episode number 356, when you were discussing prayer and worship, I often find myself praying and calling out to God during the worship at Living Springs. Sometimes I do that audibly, other times internally. Is that something that could be encouraged during worship to help people lean into prayer further? Often in my own devotion times, I find that I start by singing. It helps me focus on God and then begin to pray with more passion and volume when there is music in the background. In prayer meetings, I find it too quiet to pray out loud, so maybe that is a bad habit I have formed.
This is a new layer. This is AER about AER.
Yes.
Like we're 2 layers deep here. This is awesome. I'll just be a little bit of a butt and go, when's worship? I know we're probably using the colloquialism of worship being our singing time that we've culturally kind of referred to as worship. But by no means is that the only part of our gathering that is worshipful. There has long been a tradition, and we have tried to reinstate part of it, of having a call to worship at the beginning of our time together, which is not just a call to the singing part, and then you just have to stick around for the later parts,
Right.
but to the whole of what we do is worship, and that is being in your presence, of just being here, in your attention, in your singing as well as your praying, in your receiving of the body of Christ, as well as in your prayers joined with others, as well as in your listening with your ears and your spirit and your mind to what God may want to say through the word, and all those other things, participation in our spiritual practices we do, in receiving of a blessing at the end. Those are all worship.
Even giving of your tithes or your just offerings.
Yep.
Because sacrifice would be a big Old Testament part of worship for sure, right?
Yeah.
So
Totally.
Yeah.
And so we've been really trying to be intentional, especially the last few years, about our language around church. So we don't call our services, we call them gatherings.
Gatherings, yeah.
Because we are not here to offer you a service. We are to gather to worship our God. We are intentional about calling it our music time as a part of our sanctuary time, our music as a part of our sanctuary time, to be intentional about that. So just to be nitpicky, I'll start there.
right. But then we could.
And then we will
if we were
get
just if we were just to substitute the word singing for worship in this AER,
Yes.
then it would be that this person finds himself praying and calling out to God during the singing at Living
Totally.
Springs,
I just had to take an opportunity to be a butt. That's all.
which makes sense. I appreciate that.
Just to highlight the intentionality behind it. But I will say this, that there are... I don't think at all you can point at yourself and say, I've formed a bad habit. Let me start
No,
at the
absolutely
end.
not.
There is nothing wrong with that. It sounds like there's a lot of genuineness to the attitude with which you are approaching your times of singing and in prayer and in this part of expression of worship. The difficulty of bringing different people together is you're now trying to close the bridge or close the gaps between how everybody wants to bring their worship time to God, and especially in the expression around music, which we've highlighted a number of times now, is a very emotional and a evocative practice. There's much to consider in how each person responds to that. There was a guy I was listening to recently, just in a quick video. He was a black guy from black churches in the States, and he was kind of talking about the difference of the, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but like the largeness of the response in the black church versus the kind of lack of that in the white churches.
Of course, yeah.
And he was really trying to give a lot of credit to both, and I loved how he said it, was in the white church, that as he's experienced them, there's an intentional respect that is given in your subduedness. I want to come and I want to reflect on God. I want to honor him with my way of being respectful of this space. And he said, then in the black churches, we want to give God our all and we want to cry out to him. Both of those on the two extremes are wonderful. The difficulty comes when we try to put the two of them together.
Right.
And just practical matter of human engagement, the majority is typically going to win, and the minority is going to feel lesser than or feel out of place in that. And so I have been, and I owe much, two church environments that are extremely exuberant in comparison to how I choose to worship. I hope, and it sounds as though you like and are appreciative and feel yourself a part of our church. And I'm sorry for the gap you feel there, that you are feeling uncomfortable around this. But I also say there's nothing wrong on either side, but I do have empathy for the distance you're feeling. But I would say it doesn't have to be that others are not receiving and offering much. It's just we're coming all to it with our different personalities. And so I'd hesitate to necessarily encourage any one form of expression on a regular basis, as much as we try to highlight in our language at the beginning of every gathering. This is a space to connect with God how you best do so.
Yeah.
And we literally list, here are multiple ways we've set up, and we hope you'll take your creative imagination to others. That doesn't mean it's not going to always be easy, nor are there not going to be parts of discomfort as we do that, because bringing a bunch of different people and their expectation together always does that. But we try to make a space where lots of different ways to connect with God are welcome, and I hope you would find that as you continue in our gatherings together.
Yeah, I'll speak personally to this one. I appreciate this person saying that is the way that they, feel like prayer flows from them better, is when they're, listening to music or singing first.
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful. I think each of us is created, in a way that can honor God well. I think God created me, created you, Kyle, and did it with a reason so that we could honor him with the way we're made, right?
Yeah.
I kind of tongue in cheek almost every week, I do welcome more than any of our other staff or more than anybody else does, just because I'm not on the music team. so singing's probably not going to be my
instrument. We're hooped.
That's probably already an indicator of why I'm doing welcome and what I'm going to say to this question. But I tell everybody, I want you to best connect with God, however it is that you best do that this morning. Yeah. And then I think to myself, that means I need to leave and get out in nature right now. Because the ways we do it in the room, although I have experienced God and I appreciate community worship, my best times of connecting with God is when I'm alone, usually out in the woods somewhere or out in nature or by a lake or whatever. So I can't do it the best way in the room at our gatherings. But I do have a deep respect and understanding that community worship is important. So for me just to run out in the woods every Sunday morning, I would be missing out on that. And part of missing out on that, and I don't say this very often, but is, and I do tell my kids this, that I get to help others worship. When I'm alone, I am only worshiping by myself, and it's good for me, but there's no responsibility on me or any obligation to help others. But when I'm in the room, then I can by my actions either lead someone else into worship, or I can help others maybe feel comfortable. A lot of times the reason I sit on a Sunday morning during our gatherings
Yep.
is because I've told them they can sit.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking if they see a pastor sit, then maybe they will feel
I do the same.
encouraged to
Well,
sit
the
as
rare
well.
time I'm not on drums. Yeah.
It doesn't mean that that's maybe the best way I want to do it, but I want to help others do that. So I would say to this person, yeah, if you feel like this would encourage other people to worship in a good way,
Yeah.
then do it.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say if you go to prayer meetings or you want to be part of a prayer meeting and you say, maybe we could listen to some music,
Yeah.
do it. Right. Like use your gifts and your ways of doing worship to help other people do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, be respectful of others and know that maybe they think your way is awful, but hopefully they enjoy your community and want to be with you too, right?
Yeah.
So
Totally. On a little bit of a rabbit trail, and we've never been known to do those here. I think this is where we've again begun to pursue some wider church expression and how we've ordered our gatherings, I hope. One of the ones that's lacking, and I think I've had some conversations with friends and I don't know how to approach it, is we really are only allowing our voices and our ears and then maybe our physical bodies to be participating in worship versus our senses and our like our smells and our eyes.
Right.
And this is where other church traditions, especially your more Eastern leaning ones, like incense is an important part of worship because there's a holy now part of worship that is engaging all of my senses,
Right.
including my smells, and appreciating icons and art pieces as a reflection towards God using my visual stimulus. Like it's just a whole bodied thing then when we do that, and we try to limit our expressions and parts of worship as we put them here just to a few limited part of our senses, which is interesting to think about.
yeah, I think as a male
Yep.
and probably, well, not probably, I'm a male who grew up on a farm with a very high like maleness environment, right? Stereotypical is what I'm talking about. Like, you know, you be a guy, you don't cry, you don't do all these things, you're a man.
Yeah.
So quite often, and I remember noticing this very early as a teenager, watching worship in the church that I was going to, weird that the guys don't engage in this, right? Like,
Totally.
You know, let's sing to Jesus, and we sing songs like he's our boyfriend, like all these mushy emotional songs.
Yeah.
And then if the gifts of the Spirit, I mean, we know in the church I grew up in that didn't happen, but in other churches I went to where gifts, you know, happened, then people got really emotional. And again, I'm like, not a whole lot of guys leading the charge here.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
So all that going back to, you know, what is worship?
Yep.
The one artistic expression that we've elevated above any other is music.
Yep.
But what if someone's really creative in a different artistic way and they want to worship God through that?
Yep.
There's no opportunity for that.
Yep.
I've seen a few churches that put up a couple easels, you know,
They have a specific person designated to do the painting.
yeah, someone can go over there and paint, right?
Yeah.
And I think cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, as a North American church currently in the context we're in, we don't do a very good job of allowing people to worship in different ways.
Yeah.
We kind of set the standard of this is what worship is, which is why we call worship singing, right? Or singing worship is because
we've narrowed it to that.
We basically said this is what it is, right?
Totally. Yeah. I'll say there's I've run into, and I'll have to apologize, I haven't even introduced myself to him yet. Run into one of the pastors from the Coptic church that's in Balzac a couple times.
Yeah, okay.
One of his kids is at the same daycare as mine.
Oh, no way.
And then also I saw him at the gym the other day. I'm like, I have to introduce myself at some point, because I've jumped on their website and watched their services a few times.
Yeah.
And they're like 2.5, 3 hours long.
I've wanted to go, and I haven't had opportunity.
Yeah.
Ever since they built that building in Balzac, I'm like, and then I read up on it because I was, what is that?
Incredible, eh?
I want to go.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
and the whole room is filled with incense, and there's art all over the walls, and they have like, it's a fully engaged thing. It's all in Coptic languages.
Right.
So I wouldn't understand a word of what was going on. But like the whole thing is just so engaged with your whole body that I'm like, there's a lot we could learn from Eastern churches that we miss out on. So thanks for the question.
Yes. Hopefully we've confused you or helped you in a great way.
Now, if we get AER on this is just a new level. AER of AER of AER, and I would welcome it.
All right. We got another question, our first question today. In Daniel 9, verse 27, the Message translation indicates that worship and prayers will be abolished by the deceiver. Yet in other translations say that the deliverer will put an end to sacrifice and offering. These are very opposed, considering it was Jesus who put an end to sacrifice. Which is it and why? Thank you.
I'm just pulling them up here again. Daniel 9:27, right?
Yeah.
So let me kick off with the first part. With the worship and prayers will be abolished by the deceiver, versus putting an end to sacrifice and offering. In line with some of the conversation we've just been having, worship and prayers are sacrifice and offering to an Old Testament audience. Like that is how they offered their prayers. Again, back to the idea of like a cost to worship. That's something we are also very unfamiliar with in our modern day. For us, it costs us an hour and a bit to arrive to church somewhat on time and to then sing the songs along like Jesus karaoke kind of thing. I'm trying to be hyperbolic and a little bit funny. And then we try not to be on our phone the whole time while the pastor speaks to try to get something out of it, unless our Bible's on there. And then also maybe we get a notification from Instagram. But we go through this time and we go like, okay, I gave up an hour of my time. And then other than a couple, maybe other events throughout the month, it's not very costly. And at the same time, as we were just saying, our physical bodies and the rest of our lives are largely disassociated with the practices of worship. Versus if it took a large amount of my trust in God to offer a sacrifice physically and watch that thing just burn up in an effort of expressing worship to God and devotion to God. And at the same time, there's something really valuable about the image that would have been seen there for the person literally getting to watch their prayers ascend to God. That there is an idea of my prayers are going, that we also are a little bit disconnected from in our modern day. And so for the people in Daniel, especially for the people in Daniel, where they were now captive in another culture, disconnected from their God, from their temple, from their worship, from all the things that they knew, they would feel so alone from their ability to connect with God and cry out to Him for any hope of being able to be rescued and redeemed from the situation they found themselves in. And so for them to be able to worship to God in their mind had to include not only worship and sacrifice in that sense, but that also meant it had to be in a specific place at the temple. And so for them, they just felt they were so disconnected from God that how are we supposed to ever get relationship with Him back if we don't have these practices? Because those are the only way we're able to do so. I think that's part of why Eugene brings that language forward for us.
Yeah. So do you think they're opposed then? This person asking a question seems to think that there's an opposition here between the Message saying that it will be the deceiver and other translations saying that it'll be the deliverer, and then him assuming that that's Jesus, or him, her, whoever asked the question, assuming that it's Jesus who put the end to the sacrifice in New Testament times.
And I'm just pulling up my another translation, my go-to one, just to see what they do with it, just because I'm unfamiliar with that part. But the language of worship and prayers, I really think would be interesting when there. So if you don't mind, I'll let you jump in.
Well, I
jump there.
I only looked at the NIV, and this is the. I guess we could read the verse.
Yeah.
But this is where we get the. Sorry, I want to read the verse because I get it wrong. I'm not. We're both looking stuff up.
Yeah.
Okay, so
this is how you can know we do this live.
This is in the Message. The Message says, "Then for 1/7, He will forge many and strong alliances, but halfway through the 7, He will banish worship and prayers. At the place of worship, a desecrating obscenity will be set up and remain until finally the desecrator himself is decisively destroyed." Sorry. So that's the Message. So the Message does not say who it is that's doing this, but the implication of the text is that this is the devil or some form of evil that is setting up, this in the place of worship. They're going to they're going to end worship.
Yeah.
Kind of a prophecy here. If you read it in the NIV, and I'll pull that up for you, because that's probably the one that most people. My computer's not doing it. This is the language that I think a lot of people are probably more familiar with. At 27, he says, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7, 7 being time, if I understand this correctly. In the middle of 7, he will put an end to the sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation. Sorry, that's the phrase that I wanted to say, because a lot of people understand that as the rock of the dome or whatever in the temple place in Jerusalem, right? This is prophecy to end times. A lot of people believe this. Until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. I would argue, from the question point of view, that in the NIV anyways, it's also speaking of the deceiver or the evil one or the devil setting this up. So I guess I'm missing in the question why...
I don't have any other translations that have anything else other than that. I'm going to pull up Bible Gateway, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's Gateway. Oh, no. Actually, it always comes up.
So I guess I can, as you're looking at that, I can answer the question and say, yes, obviously it's Jesus who changes the sacrificial system when he comes. You know, we get that language. Definitely Paul gives us much more clarity in Galatians, especially around chapter 3 when he talks about, you know, the law being abolished and all those things, right?
Yeah.
That is Christ who did that. But if this is a prophecy of end times, which I think most people consider it to be in Daniel, then we're not talking about Jesus. We are talking about an evil presence or the devil or whoever trying to do his best to defeat God and the nation of Israel specifically. So maybe they're opposed in that if you think that it's Jesus who changed the system, yes, he did. Like that's obvious he did. We know that from history. But if it's a prophecy still yet to come, then it's not Jesus who's going to end this worship and make it bad for the people in the end times, I guess.
Yeah. I'm looking at some other translation here, and I'm not seeing anything that would lean to the message. So let me just get back to the question to make sure I'm saying this the right way. The deceiver being the one, or the deceiver is the one who does all this every time. So I'm reading from the ESV here. And after the 60 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. The people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city. So now it shifts characters there in the ESV. I had the NIV up as well, and it was the same thing in verse 26 where the anointed one is cut off. So Peterson's doing this flip as well, just in a different way linguistically. The part that I would say is also needs to be taken into consideration is just because the deceiver, so to speak, is the one who is doing this does not mean it's not necessarily a part of God allowing it to happen.
Right.
And so the character who does these things, so many times throughout the Old Testament, especially within the prophets, which Daniel would also play into that role, as well as apocalyptic literature, God allows other nations to bring out his desired consequence. And so you are fighting against me, Israel. I'm going to remove my protection from you, and then the Assyrians will come and take you over. Is a pretty common one. Babylonians, fill in the blank. What happens on I will have to look this up if somebody sends it in for AER. I was reading it recently, but I can't remember where it was. Where God actually then has to punish one of those nations because they took the punishment too far.
Right. Yes.
Right? It's like, I trusted you to bring on the consequence that was needed. When you stop worshiping me, Israel, and I then remove my protection from you by doing so, you face the natural consequences in the same way that we would let our kids face the natural consequences of their actions. And we're going to remove a level of protection, then they're going to go, oh, that hurt. Probably shouldn't do that again.
Right.
This is what's happening. But then when that goes too far, if I tell my two kids, oldest kids are Emery and Levi, if I tell Levi, I'm not going to stop Emery if she punches you if you keep bugging her.
Yeah.
And then she hears that and takes that way too far. Okay, I'm gonna have to revert my words and go and
that's
punish
a very
her.
good example of that. Yeah.
And so God is allowing these things to happen. Now, God is not going to set up a deception. And I don't think God is even going to have somebody set up a deception. The other thing is prophecy is connected to the likelihood of the way things are going to go and telling, if I remove my level of protection from you, from this anointed one in verse 26, what's going to happen is somebody's going to set something up that's way worse.
Yeah.
I can see that happening. And so this deceiver setting up the desolation of abomination comes later. Now, with end time stuff, I would say this probably was fulfilled in the either a number of times when the temple within the second temple period.
Totally.
So we could get into that a whole other time, but I feel like the switch is pretty consistent amongst other translations, and Peterson's choice of worship and prayer versus sacrifice and offerings. Again, I think we've bridged that one.
Yeah, totally. So thank you for the question. If we didn't answer it the way that you were intending it, I apologize for that. Please send in some AER and we'll try and get better clarity if you need more clarity on that, for sure. All right, next question. Throughout the New Testament, there are references to people's hearts becoming hardened. Sometimes Jesus uses this phrase to describe those who don't understand the meaning behind his parables, but other times there are references about people whose hearts had become hardened, or it might say, don't let your heart become hard. What does this mean? How can we keep our hearts soft or open to Jesus?
Awesome question. And just for clarity's sake, this is also something that happens all through the Old Testament too. Hardened hearts, and is prophesied to be able to be something that is changed. Joel, that I'll take out your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Right. Those Pharaoh is the biggest one that I'm thinking of.
Always,
God hardens Pharaoh's heart so that he would not let the Israelites go. Again, we've discussed that one a long time ago on this podcast and what that means. So this is something across both testaments where we have been warned of, and I think is a really common human experience put into some beautiful language here, where many of us have either unfortunately received or maybe even been on the giving end of what it means to allow our hearts to get hard, where we allow gap and distance between relationships to grow, where we let bitterness bear its own fruit, where we don't think the best of the other, where we allow whatever else it is to come in, and it kills the way it dims hope. Is really what I would say there, where we aren't allowing anything to come in. And so the dimming of hope or the hardening of our pliability, like the nature of a pliable heart, a soft heart, is one that can be changed. I can be shown again that God could bring something out of this situation, or I could see how this relationship could be restored, even though I've been really hurt by it. But the minute we've allowed bitterness or anger or whatever to just breed more of itself,
I would even add apathy in there.
Yeah, that's a great one. Like that closes off to any change and solidifies the direction we've chosen to go in, if I could put it that way. So if you've had a human relationship that has hurt you, the more you focus on that hurt and the refusal to see a different way forward, the more true that will become. And I think the same happens with God. And when we're dealing with our hard heart towards God, it is so much more overarching than any other area in our relationship or in our life. If I were to let my heart become hard to you, Blake, I do hope that never happens, but it would be a much smaller implication than the ways that God wants to speak to me, because those are all encompassing to my whole life. I hope the way that I follow God has implications for my wife, for my kids, for the strangers on the streets, for my finances, for my body, for my everything. And so when my heart becomes hard towards the ways of God, it is a whole life thing and closes us off to forgiveness, to grace, to joy, to so many different parts of our life. And not only in the expressing of them, but also in the receiving of them, I think. And so this is something that the New Testament, the whole of the Bible, is seriously concerned with, because it's not, again, jumping to the Calvinist-Arminian debate. I don't think there's no turning back on God's side. I think there is a reality of God's freedom that he's given us where it is very unlikely, if not impossible, once we hit a certain state, that there's hope for us to be softened again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I quote Doug all the time. He started saying this years ago. I haven't heard him say it much lately. I think I say it more than he does, but that we're either being hardened by life or softened by Christ. And the more I am in my role as a pastor and deal with people, the more I believe that is true. And that's why I say it so much, because I will regularly challenge people, and probably my family more than anybody, because they're the closest to me on that. Like, where are you at with this decision, or what you're thinking? Are you being hardened by life? Because it's very easy to be hardened by life. Life is unfair. It's going to hurt you. People are part of life. They're going to do all those things, right? We're going to be disappointed because our expectations are not going to be met. Very few of us get all the expectations that we wish we could have, right? And all those things wound us. And when we allow those wounds to affect us, like you're saying, Kyle, we will get protective of that, and we will get hard. The only antidote to that I'm aware of is Jesus. And I was reading something last night and loved it. Just a guy talking about the difference between the gifts of the Spirit and the fruit of the Spirit, and saying so often we will chase after the gift of the Spirit because they're exciting. But the fruit of the Spirit is a result of God working in me, like patience and kindness and love and joy and peace and self-control. Those things, I think, are very much the indicators of someone who's been softened by Christ. And that is what we should be after. And I think that's what Jesus saw, obviously, in his time, which is no different than any other period of time. But as he's walking around with people, as he's declaring the good news, as he's giving them, healings and all these things, he's watching people and going, are your hearts soft to this? Or are your hearts hard? Right? Have you hardened yourself to the place where you can't hear the message, or you're unwilling to bend or change or be flexible or be submissive to God's will in your life or to other people, right? That you can be kind to and be patient and all those things. So, So yeah, I think it's well worth pointing out, and I'm glad this question came in, that is one of the greatest just warnings in the Bible. Is to not let your heart become hard. And it's there because that it's very easy for that to happen.
Jesus used this a number of times, like you said, with his parables, which is, I think, is a really interesting one. I jumped to the prodigal son is one of the most obvious ones. Like the son who was the total screw up. God had a space for him, and we're so happy to receive that message.
Oh, absolutely.
But we are so slow to want to see that applied to anybody else. We are so the older brother when that happens.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that parable is best read when we highlight the older brother at the end. And we go like, he got back and the dad loved him and he received the dad's love. We're way more the older brother. And that's what Jesus points to the Pharisees of the place. Who are you in this story? And how will you respond is really what that's coming at. And so our hearts can be quick to receive this without realizing how hard they are towards others, which is a big warning I've taken for a number of years. I
think that parable even points to who God is, which again, we're like, oh, the Father is amazing, right? And we attribute that Father, or we say that Father then is supposed to be God, the image of God. But if we take that story and go, okay, well, what about me? What about when my children or people I care about hurt me and stomp all over me? Would I run to them and fall on them and kiss them on the back of the neck or whatever the story says? Probably not. Most of us are like, not a chance, right? And yet, again, that's because of our hardness. Whereas Christ is saying we should be forgiving and we should be like that. That is huge, right?
Oh, incredibly. And so we want to ask all the time, like how there's always space for our hearts to be softened. And yes, the prophecies of the Old Testament and the promises of the New are that this is found in Jesus by his Holy Spirit. And this is an incredible gift. There are many different things we can do to keep our hearts soft and open to Jesus. We can start jumping into some of them, but I would say one of the most important ones is going to be simply spending time reading scripture and in prayer with an openness of mind and heart to not just get the task done. If you're just reading your Bible or praying to get it done and check it off a list to be done with the day, there's no space for you to reflect. And so a reflective type of reading is a really important one.
And back just to what we were talking about, worship.
Yeah.
Like this being open to what Christ is doing in our life, to giving him praise and honor, all those things work towards a softness of heart.
Totally.
Yeah.
And to reflect on him and to be as genuine as you can. If you're having a terrible day, say that to God.
Yeah.
No cleaning it up. If you're really struggling with something and you're frustrated with it, just say that. Another one that's become really important to me, both to God and trying as much as I can to allow it to just stay there, is the practice of confession. Mm-hmm. There is nothing more humbling than looking another human in the eyes and telling them how you are a screw up.
Yeah.
Right. And that keeps your heart really soft in my experience of being able to admit where I struggle. Because the minute I speak that out, it's like it sucks all the power out of it. And that bit of hardness is softened just a little bit in my heart. And I reach on my right hand, my left. I know where my heart sits. Don't worry. Like that is another one that I can't emphasize enough in our Protestant circles, the practice of confessing to one another, and not in a, it is when we begin to do it more, it is one of the most freeing practices. I don't think the fear of it ever goes away.
Yeah.
It's nerve-wracking to do it every time. But the minute you've done it, it's like, that was so good. And it becomes one of the most important things we can do so we can keep our hearts soft too. And that falls in the same line of reflection of like regularly taking stock of where we're at is the only way to keep our heart soft. Because if we're not, it's just going to harden because we're not paying attention to it.
Yeah. So true. Confession's an interesting one. Again, in our Christian culture and the way we've done things, I've heard lots of people, probably even including myself, want to believe that if we've confessed to Christ, that it's all good.
Yep.
That I don't need to tell you, Kyle, my stuff, right?
Yep.
God took care of it. It's in the past. It's all done.
Yeah.
Excellent. But what we miss out on that when we do that is the forgiveness that can come from someone looking you in the eye and saying you're forgiven. And we've done that on a Sunday morning where we've done this thing where we've said, can you turn to the person and tell them they're forgiven?
Yeah.
There's something powerful about that. And it's way more powerful when you're actually looking for forgiveness from someone who matters, whether they're the person you've hurt or just a person who can, have that weight carried with you. There is a beauty in community, again, that God has built in that, we're not lone soldiers. We don't get to run off in the woods by ourselves all the time. Yeah. When we live with people and we confess to people, there is a freedom that can back to the softness of heart, definitely give us a great softness of heart. So I'm with you on that.
Awesome. I think we got time for one more.
Sure.
I'm going to pull up the scripture so I can read it once you're done.
All right. We'll try and be proactive on this one. I'll stall here for a second while you get the passage so we don't have dead air.
Deal.
This question says, I find the passage of James chapter 1 verses 5-8 scary. What kind of wisdom is it talking about when it says you must believe when you pray? It tells me not to doubt when I pray, but the truth is I have a lot of doubt when I pray.
So I'm going to read James 1, 5-8, just for context.
Yeah.
Now, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God for it, who gives all to all without reservation and not reproaching, and it will be given to him. But let him ask for it in faith, without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like a surf to the sea, driven by the wind and tossed about. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He's double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways. You want to jump in first? I've jumped in a few times. Feel free.
Yeah, I'll say there's a few scriptures in the Bible that are scary like that.
Yeah.
This one definitely puts a weight because we think, okay, I want to pray. I want to ask God for things. I want to obviously have his blessing in my life.
Yep.
And when I pray and it says I doubt that I'm just this rudderless ship or this, person who can't tell my right from my left, whatever phrasing and analogy you want to use on this metaphor. It sounds terrible and scary.
Yeah.
I guess I'd start by saying the encouragement, and I think you need to read the rest of James,
Yeah.
Continue on because context is important, is this idea that we strive after Christ, right?
Yeah.
And this faith that we find is a faith in what we believe God can do.
Yeah.
And I think that changes, especially this is going to lead, if you read the rest of James, especially the next chapter, it kind of leads into this healing kind of place, right? And especially James 5, sorry, I'm thinking of that, where, if we don't have faith, then we're not going to get healed.
Yeah.
And I think that puts a lot of emphasis on me and what I actually believe and have seen and experienced.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I'm going to have doubts. And I think any human would.
Yeah.
But if I read my Bible and I see the miracles that Jesus performed and I think of how big God is or how much I don't know about God, but I believe he's that big, then my faith is much more on God than it is on me, right? My limited experience, my limited understanding is going to go, I have no clue. I doubt that all the time. But I believe in a God who is almighty and can do all things. And I think that's kind of the challenge there is, to me anyways, is challenging my faith as to, is it just Blake Hardy's faith or is it the faith that I read in scripture and I see other people have? You talk about the shoulders we stand on of the people who've gone before us, that God is enduring and he is faithful. Then that's a difference for me. I don't know if I'm explaining that properly, but I think that's it. It doesn't rely on me. It relies on God, and I believe God is faithful. Yeah. Right.
Totally. Let me give some context of the larger conversation of James.
Yeah, totally.
Which I think is a really helpful place to start. James is having a conversation of the connection between faith as an idea is useless without action.
Yeah.
Which is a really important one for James and has been a large point of conversation for all of church history.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to consider the conversation James is having when he then says, let him ask for it in faith without any doubting. So if we're going to ask for wisdom, I think what James is getting at is if you're going to ask for God to help guide you towards what you're going to do, you better be willing to do it.
Yeah, that's very true, Kyle.
I really think that's that's where I've always come with this passage of like, James is saying, if you're asking for wisdom, be ready to do it, because they're asking for it in faith. And the larger conversation of what James is saying about faith is it has to be done. And so then for me, it makes more clarity of the latter part of that statement. For the one who doubts, if that's the opposite of faith, is like a surf of the sea. Hear one thing and do another. Hear one thing and do another. Back and forth, the ebbs and flows of a sea. Yeah. Like that just gives a lot more to a visual picture. And then, driven about by the wind and tossed about of like, I really know this, but I'm going to go this direction anyways. Similar to when Jesus gives the parable of the two sons, the one who says, I'll do it and doesn't. Yeah. And the son who doesn't respond and then does the action later. Yeah. And Jesus says, that's the one who is deserving of reward. I think this is what James is getting at. If you're willing to ask, God's going to give wisdom. He'll give clarity. But you better be willing to do it, or else why ask?
Yeah, and that lines up, Kyle, with what I've thought about, healing for a long time. Yeah. Just, again, in my experience, but then going, okay, what's the greater thing here is I don't know how God works with healing. I don't know how and when and why he heals some and not others and the way that I want it to or people want it to and not, right? Like all those things are questions. Yeah. But I always feel like if I have an opportunity to pray for healing for someone, then I should just do that. Yeah. That is the action, right? My faith tells me God can do the miraculous. Yeah. You've asked for prayer. I will pray. Yeah. Whatever happens after that, that's on God. Yeah. That's not me. Yeah. Right. I've been faithful in doing the action. Yeah. And same thing, I guess, if you back it up to James 1, where he's talking about wisdom, if I'm going to pray for wisdom and God says, then you should do this, I should do that. Yeah. Right? Like,
totally. And James begins the whole section here. Consider all joy, my brothers, whenever you encounter various trials, because the testing of your faith produces endurance. Let endurance have its perfect effect, so you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. Like he starts with this call to be faithful,
Yeah.
to do the right thing in face of trial and tribulation. And then goes this. So if you want wisdom, do this. And then like, I don't know, it just, and then he goes back to enduring and testing in verse 12 and 13, even down to 16, you could argue he's all talking about the same thing. And yet we yank these two passages out.
Yeah.
Or three verses out, are like, hey, by the way, this is about how to ask for wisdom, disconnecting it entirely from the various trials and tribulations that are supposed to be a blessing, and going, well, God's going to give me the help. I just got to be willing to follow through with it. And I think especially to the churches James is writing to that are now beginning to see persecution and all sorts of difficulty. Paul's writing to them in different contexts and different situations. Like, there is something important to a church who is struggling to believe that there's even possibly a way through this, that they're going to survive it at all, that this Jesus way is even worth it. And he's writing to them, God's going to give you wisdom. He's going to allow you to do it, but hold fast. And he goes on from there to be the just doers of, and not just hearers.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to cost you. You'd be foolish to give up now. You're going to just be tossed by whatever tribulations life throws at you. Like, again, to play the whole wording out, you're going to just be stuck under circumstances. And why would you want to live that way? Instead, ask for wisdom. God will give it to you. Follow through with it. Do what he says, because it means to do something with faith.
Yeah. James is both, it can be a scary book.
Yeah.
Be a very discouraging book because it does talk about these trials and temptations and everything we're going to have to endure. And I think, although it applied to the churches that he was writing to, I think most people could read this book and go, oh, this is my life. Right. But then it can be very encouraging if we actually believe what James is preaching here, that Jesus is faithful and that he is better and all these things. Right. So,
now nobody should be praying for these situations to come forward.
No.
I'll start with that. Paul actually encourages specifically, don't pursue asceticism. You're going to get enough struggle in your life. Jesus has promised it, so we're good for that. In this world, you will have trouble. Are Jesus' words, thanks to the discouraging Savior.
Yes.
We will have enough, but I think, again, the human experience, every one of us knows we are grown and stretched through trials and tribulations, that when we've been, I would even say outside of the Christian context, when we've been faithful to doing right, we see that we grow, and we're forced to through those moments.
Well, that's the weird people, all people, who say, I'm really glad I went through that experience.
Yeah.
And they don't mean that in the sense of like, geez, I wish everybody, had whatever example you want to throw in there.
Yeah.
But knowing that their faith has grown on the other side, knowing that they are a better person, in a Christ-centered way, on the other side of those things.
Yeah.
And that, again, I think this, comes back to a soft and hard heart, right? If you have a hard heart through these things, probably not going to have that testimony that says, I'm glad that happened to me. But people with a soft heart, I think they look at that and go, man, this is Christ working in me, right?
Yeah.
So,
So, don't pray for these. Life will throw enough of them your way. But it is, a dangerous concept to think about, an intimidating one, because it will cost us.
Yeah.
But there is great joy, as he puts it at the beginning. Consider all joy, my brothers, when you face various trials. And I think that's what we're supposed to set our eyes on. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy in the moment, but it's the ability. I was even talking with little Blakely this morning, my youngest. She's been developing some real nerves around going to school. And so I was talking to her this morning about just like the good that's going to come on the other side. She loves her afternoon part of school. She hates the morning. Like, so if we can go through the morning, you're going to get to the afternoon.
Yeah.
So count it all joy. And it's forward thinking of, I know this is going to suck. I know what the situation that I'm in is here. But the great hope of the message of Jesus is that none of these get the last word.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we will be built through it. And so if we see Jesus as the answer to all of suffering, as we're supposed to, then we should be able to join with James, count it all joy, and then ask for faith, ask for wisdom, and follow through with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not easy. And I'm not praying it for you.
Really good, Kyle. I think we can probably wrap up on that one.
Yeah.
But thanks, everyone, for joining in. Thanks for sending your questions. Keep them coming. Visit invertedorthodoxy.com where you can submit your questions, and we will continue to journey through them and try and lead you to greater hope and confidence in Christ. Have a great week, everybody. See you next week.
See you guys.